Hey guys, this is Leo here from Leo's Fried Potatoes. Obviously, as you guys should know, I'm here with today's episode of Magic Mondays, where today I have a deck that I kind of labeled WinCon, because it just kind of has a couple different auto wins rather than actual stable winning conditions, really, of like combat or anything. It's kind of just auto win effects. So let's look that up. To start, we have we have four Alloy Mirror, which are three generic to cast mirror creatures that are artifact creatures that tap to add one of any color. And then we have two Copper Mirror, which are 1/1s that tap to add one green. Again, also mirror creatures. This deck will actually have more mirror than you've seen so far in any of my decks. You got Core Tapper, which is two generic to cast for a 1/1 mirror artifact creature. You can tap it to put a charge counter on an artifact, or you sack it to put two on a target artifact. So there's four of those. Then we have Hellkite Tyrant, which whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you gain control of all artifacts they control. And it has Flying Trample. It's 4 generic and 2 red to cast for a 6/5. It's just a dragon creature. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. Most things in this deck are artifacts, so kind of there it goes. Next, we have Iron Mirror, 2 generic for a 1/1 artifact creature, and it taps to add 1 red. And then one of my favorite mirror to use, Mirror Galvanizer. I have 4 of them, I think. Yeah, 4 of them. They're 3 generic to cast for a 2/2 that gives all other mirror +1/+1, and 1 of any color and tap it. You untap each other mirror you control. So for 2 of them, you got 2 galvanizers around, then that's an infinite combo right there. And got 4 of them because 4 doesn't hurt at all. Increases draw chance and the pump. So yeah. Let's see. Next, I have 2 Vidalcan Infusers. For 3 and a blue. It's just a Vidalcan wizard. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a charge counter on target artifact. So there's that. And that is for, there's I think a couple artifacts that take charge counters between that and Core Tapper. And then the next thing we have here is Viral Drake, 3 generic and 1 blue to cast for a 1/4. It also has flying, and it has Infect, which that doesn't really matter to the deck really, but it deals damage -1/-1 counters and to players and poison counters instead of normal damage. And then for 3 generic and a blue, you proliferate, which means you choose any number of permanents for players with counters on them, and you give each another counter of kind already there. So you don't have to choose everybody. And with the new rulings, if there's a -1/-1 counter on something and a +1/+1 counter on something, they cancel out. They don't just sit one of each anymore, which kind of is sad. But that gets creatures out of the way. Now I have 2 Amulet of Vigors in here, which are 1 generic to cast artifacts that whenever a permanent enters the battlefield tapped under your control, untap it. That mainly is for Cloud Post, which if you remember from one of my older videos, is a land that I have that I'll just refresh you guys later. Then I have 2 Contagion Clasp, which is a 2 generic to cast artifact, and when it enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. And then for 4 generic, and tap it, you proliferate. And so I do have quite a few proliferate spells in here. I have 3 contagion engines in here, which are 6 generic mana to cast. Artifacts that when it enters the battlefield, you put a -1/-1 counter on each creature target player controls. And then for 4 generic mana and tapping it, you proliferate twice, which is gonna add up pretty quick. And then another one of the auto win cards here is Darksteel Reactor. For 4 generic to cast, it's an artifact that's indestructible. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a charge counter on it. And when it has 20 or more charge counters on it, you win the game. And next, we have 2 energy two energy chambers, which is 2 generic mana to cast. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a +1/+1 counter on target artifact creature, or put a charge counter on target non-creature artifact, which for the most part will be using charge counters for this. And I have 2 Magnificent Lattice, which I'm using it in this deck to turn everything into artifacts, although the mana changing is nice. But that's about it for this deck, although making everything colorless might affect other things that don't really matter to the deck. Then I have 1 Planar Bridge, which, as you remember from a couple videos ago, is 6 generic mana to cast, for and 8 generic, and tapping it to use its ability. You search your library for anything, any permanent, and put it on the battlefield. And then I also have 1 Unwinding Clock, which is 4 generic to cast, and each artifact I control untaps during every player's untap step. So that's when I get tap locked by things like it doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. That helps, and that also just gives me more chances to use different triggers, like Core Tapper, for instance. I can untap it, and then so instead of just once per my turn, I would be able to get once per each other player's turn, which most of the time in Forge it'll only be one other player anyway. But now the next thing here that is one of the win cons is Helix Pinnacle is 1 green to cast. It's an enchantment with Shroud, which Shroud means nothing can target it, whether it's an ability you control or an opponent's control. And then for each mana you pay, you put that many tower counters on it. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 100 more tower counters on it, you win the game. Which I thought that was charge counters initially. I guess I just kind of forgot. Then I have Inexorable Tide for 3 generic to cast, plus 2 blue to cast. Whenever you cast a spell, proliferate. It doesn't so even if it's countered, you still proliferate. And I have 2 of those, or I have 4 of those actually. Come on, hang on a sec. All right. So lastly, we got Mana Base here, on which we have 4 Cloud Posts, which are just locust lands that enter tapped, hence that little 1-cost artifact from before. And then it taps to add 1 colorless for each locust land and play. So we have 4 of those and 4 Glimmer Post. Alright, just gonna skip Gaia's Cradle for a minute, which you guys should remember from a previous video. But got Glimmer Post, which is the other locust land. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life for each locust on the field, so that does include itself, and then it taps to add for 1 colorless. And then what's next for that little group is Thespian Stage. It taps to add a colorless, or 2 colorless and tap it. Or sorry, 2 generic and tap it. It becomes a copy of any target land, except it can copy other lands later on. So generally what I do with that is I just copy Cloudpost with it. And then we got Vesuva, which came out a while after Cloudpost, but before Glimmerpost. And it enters the battlefield tapped as a copy of any land on the field. So you're pretty much getting 12 Cloudposts and then 4 Glimmerposts with that, which will add a lot of mana. And then next, this guy is Cradle, which I have 2 of them. Unlike Cloudpost, it's legendary, and it taps to add 1 green for each creature you control. Then we have, lastly, Tolarian Academy, which taps to add 1 blue for each artifact you control. And that one also is legendary. But that kind of sums up this little WinCon deck. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, drop a like. Do subscribe if you want to stay up to date with all videos. And ring that little bell for each and every video. And see you next time.